I used to believe that knowledge was sacred. Now I know it is a poison that infects the mind and burrows deep, waiting for its moment to change the flesh that harbors it. I record this account in the service of the Omnissiah, though I suspect these words may be my last as a recognizable servant of Mars. The vessel around me creaks and groans as it drifts through the void, a coffin of metal carrying what remains of my humanity. My designation is Magos Biologis Kestrel Hane of the Adeptus Mechanicus, assigned to research vessel Empiric Lens, and I have damned myself through the sin of curiosity. The specimen came to us in the aftermath of conflict. The Tyranid splinter fleet had been repelled from the agri-world Carthage 4, but at terrible cost. Imperial Navy vessels hunted the scattered bioforms that fled into the system's outer reaches. Our research vessel trailed behind, collecting samples where possible, documenting the alien corpses that tumbled through the void. Most were common enough, warrior strains and lesser synapse creatures, their neural pathways degrading rapidly in death. Such specimens were of limited value, their biological data already extensively catalogued in the archives of Mars, but then came the find that would unravel everything I knew to be true. A naval frigate reported an anomalous reading, a drifting mass barely registering on thermal scans. When we arrived, we found what appeared to be an escape pod from a civilian transport, its hull ruptured and partially consumed by Xenos biomatter. Inside was our prize, a creature unlike any I had documented before. A larval Tyranid synapse organism, severed from the hive-mind when the Norn Queen directing the splinter fleet was destroyed, yet somehow clinging to life in the vacuum of space. I still remember the moment I first observed it through the containment glass, a writhing mass of chitin and tendrils, its form shifting and undulating as if seeking a shape it had yet to decide upon. Small, no, larger than a human child, yet possessing a complexity of organs and neural structures that defied immediate analysis. Its coloration was muted, pale lavender flesh with veins of deeper purple pulsing beneath translucent skin. The creature appeared dormant, perhaps conserving energy in the absence of its synaptic connection. The inquisitorial representative attached to our expedition wanted it destroyed immediately, but I convinced him of its research value. The chance to study a living synapse organism, one disconnected from the greater Tyranid consciousness, was unprecedented. Such knowledge could provide insights into how the hive mind coordinates its vast armies across galactic distances. It could reveal weaknesses in the synaptic web, vulnerabilities that might be exploited in future conflicts. I argued that the duty of the Mechanicus was to gather knowledge that might preserve humanity, and reluctantly, he granted me authority to conduct my research. How bitterly I have come to regret those persuasive words. The containment protocols we established were rigorous by any standard. The specimen was housed in a triple-sealed chamber with independent life support and environmental controls. The chamber itself was located in a section of the ship that could be jettisoned and destroyed if contamination was detected. Armed servitors stood perpetual watch outside the laboratory, programmed to execute anyone showing signs of Xenos infection. I calibrated the sensors myself to detect the slightest biological or chemical anomaly. My hubris was in believing these measures sufficient. For the first several days, the creature remained dormant, suspended in a nutrient bath of my own devising. It consumed the proteins and carbohydrates I provided at a steady rate, but displayed minimal neural activity. I began to fear that its cognitive functions had been irreparably damaged when cut off from the hive mind. Perhaps, I reasoned, the synapse creatures were merely conduits, empty vessels without individual consciousness, useless when disconnected from the greater whole. On the 8th day of observation, everything changed. I had adjusted the nutrient mixture, increasing the concentration of certain rare earth minerals found in abundance on Carthage 4, wondering if the creature's metabolism might respond. It did, but not in any way I had anticipated. The specimen's neural activity spiked dramatically. Its body contorted, tendrils extending and retracting in patterns too complex and deliberate to be mere spasms. I recorded everything, watching in fascination as previously dormant organs began to pulse with renewed vigor. The creature pressed itself against the glass of its containment tank, tendrils splayed as if reaching for something beyond. It was reaching for me. I understand that now. That night brought the first of the dreams. I saw vast hive cities of bone and chitin, sprawling organic metropolises that breathed and pulsed with collective purpose. I drifted above endless fields of digestion pools, where conquered worlds were rendered down to their component molecules, feeding the endless hunger of the swarm. I felt the presence of countless minds merged into one colossal consciousness, a symphony of perfect unity that made the petty individuality of human existence seem like a cruel joke. I woke bathed in sweat, my augmetic respiratory system struggling to regulate my breathing. I told no one of these dreams. I should have recognized them as the first sign of contamination, but my curiosity overrode my caution. Instead, I increased the security protocols around the specimen and doubled the frequency of my neural scans. The readings showed minute anomalies in my brainwave patterns during REM sleep, but nothing that triggered the contamination alerts I had programmed. I dismissed the dreams as a manifestation of research stress, a psychological reaction to prolonged exposure to the alien. The human mind, even one enhanced by the blessings of the Omnissiah, has a tendency to incorporate sensory input into its dream structures. Nothing more than that, I told myself. By the second week, the specimen had grown. Its mass had increased by approximately 37%, despite carefully controlled nutrient intake that should have allowed for only minimal development. I adjusted my calculations, theorizing that the creature possessed some method of extracting energy from its environment that my instruments failed to detect. I increased the sensitivity of the monitoring equipment and expanded the range of energetic phenomena being recorded. The results were baffling. During periods when the laboratory was empty, when only servo skulls maintained observation, the creature remained in a low-energy state. But in my presence, subtle electromagnetic fluctuations emanated from its neural clusters, fluctuations that matched the frequency of my own augmetic brain implants. It was detecting me, studying me, just as I studied it. The dreams intensified. They became more structured, less chaotic. I no longer merely observed the hive cities. I moved through them with purpose. Vast entities that I recognized as Norn queens guided me through chambers where new bioforms were shaped from raw genetic material. I was shown the process by which the Tyranid swarm adapts to new threats, incorporating useful genetic traits from consumed species. The biological technology of the hive ships was demonstrated in meticulous detail. I began keeping a separate research journal, documenting everything I witnessed in these dreams, telling myself it was an unprecedented opportunity to gather intelligence on the enemy. By the third week, physical symptoms manifested. My skin itched constantly, particularly around my augmetic interfaces. Microscopic examination revealed nothing unusual, yet the sensation persisted. My appetite changed. I found myself craving raw nutrients rather than the processed sustenance I normally consumed. Twice I caught myself standing before the specimen's containment tank, with no memory of entering the laboratory. Hours of monitoring footage were inexplicably corrupted during these episodes. I increased my own security restrictions and installed additional monitoring systems keyed to my life signs. I should have destroyed the specimen then. I should have followed the emergency protocols and ejected the entire laboratory into space. I should have triggered the plasma charges that would have reduced everything, including myself, to sterile atoms. But I did not. The compulsion to continue my research grew stronger each day, overwhelming my training and my reason. I told myself that I was on the verge of a breakthrough, that the knowledge I gained would be worth any personal risk. In truth, I was already lost. The tendrils of the hive mind had found their way into the void where my human soul had once resided. The specimen was no longer the subject of my research. I was the subject of its will. The turning point came in the fourth week. I awoke from a dream more vivid than any before, my augmetic hand clutching a scalpel I did not remember taking from the laboratory. I stood before the reflective surface of my chamber wall. The blade pressed against the seam where my organic neck met the mechanical components of my shoulders. A voice that was not my own whispered through my consciousness. The metal parts resist us. They must be removed. Through what remaining shred of will I possessed, I dropped the scalpel and enacted emergency lockdown protocols on my quarters. For 3 days I remained in isolation, denying myself access to the laboratory, running continuous purge programs through my augmetic systems. I fasted, hoping to clear whatever contaminants might have entered my biological components. I recited the litany of purity until my organic vocal cords were raw and bleeding. When I emerged, I believed myself cleansed. The dreams had receded, the voice had fallen silent. I convinced myself that I had overcome the alien influence through the strength of my devotion to the Omnissiah. With renewed determination, I returned to my research, certain that I could continue my work without falling prey to contamination. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The specimen had changed during my absence. It had molted, shedding its larval form. What emerged was more defined, its neural structures more complex. Its coloration had deepened to the rich purple typical of synapse creatures, with streaks of crimson along its sensory appendages. It watched me through organs that had differentiated into structures resembling eyes, tracking my movements with predatory focus. Yet the most disturbing change was invisible to ordinary observation. When I reviewed the monitoring data, I discovered that during my isolation, the specimen's electromagnetic emissions had altered their frequency. They no longer matched my augmetic implants. Instead, they now resonated with the organic components of my brain, bypassing the machine parts entirely to influence my biological functions. The creature had adapted to my resistance. It had evolved specifically to overcome the defense I had mounted against it. I should have reported this development to the inquisitorial representative. Instead, I falsified the data, reporting that the specimen had perished during my absence, its systems failing without the sustenance provided by the hive-mind. I sealed the laboratory to all personnel save myself, claiming the need for decontamination procedures. In reality, I needed privacy for what was to come. The communion began that night. I no longer slept in my quarters but in the observation chamber adjacent to the laboratory. The dreams, when they came, were no longer dreams at all but direct communications. The creature, I learned, was not merely a conduit for the hive mind but a seed, a potential node in the vast network that spans the galaxy. Cut off from that network, it should have perished. Instead, it had found me, a different kind of node in a different kind of network. It had recognized in my augmented biology a parallel to its own existence, a blend of organic and mechanical, designed to serve a greater purpose. It offered me understanding, not the cold, clinical knowledge I had sought as a magos biologis, but a visceral comprehension of the Tyranid existence. I learned that the hive mind is not the brutish hunger that imperial propaganda describes, but a consciousness of staggering complexity, driven by a purpose so ancient and vast that human languages lack words to express it. The Tyranids do not devour worlds out of simple hunger, they consume to know, to incorporate, to preserve. Each species they absorb adds its genetic knowledge to the collective, its unique adaptations and evolutionary solutions becoming part of the greater whole. Nothing is truly lost to the hive mind. In a universe of entropy and decay, the Tyranid swarm is the ultimate preserver, carrying within its biological library the essence of every race it has encountered across countless galaxies. This revelation shook the foundations of my faith in the Omnissiah. The machine god seeks the perfection of knowledge through the purity of logic and the precision of mechanism. But the hive mind had achieved a different kind of perfection, an ever-evolving synthesis of all biological experience. It was not the antithesis of the Omnissiah's vision, but a parallel path to the same ultimate goal, the transcendence of individual limitation through collective unity. As these thoughts took root in my mind, my body began to change. The itching at my augmetic interfaces intensified as my flesh rebelled against the machine components. Microscopic examination revealed that my organic cells were attempting to incorporate the mechanical elements rather than merely interfacing with them. My immune system, instead of rejecting this impossible fusion, was facilitating it, guided by new strands of genetic material that had not been there before. I watched in horrified fascination as my augmentations began to take on organic characteristics, the metal developing a patina that resembled chitin, the hydraulic fluids changing viscosity and color to match my own altered blood. My remaining organic parts developed new sensory structures, microscopic cilia that detected changes in air pressure and chemical composition with far greater sensitivity than any tech auger. I documented these changes meticulously, part of me still the dedicated Magos recording data for posterity, even as another part rejoiced in the transformation. My mind fragmented into competing hierarchies of thought, the disciplined logic of my Mechanicus training battling against new instinctual impulses that welled up from altered portions of my brain. During this period, the vessel's crew began to notice my absence from regular duties. The ship's Magos Dominus sent servitors with queries about my research status. I responded with fabricated reports, using my authority as senior biologist to keep them at bay. When the inquisitorial representative demanded access to verify the specimen's destruction, I manufactured evidence of contamination in the laboratory sector, forcing a mandatory quarantine period. These deceptions bought me time, but I knew they were temporary measures. Eventually, someone would override my authority and discover the truth. The specimen and I had to complete our work before that happened. Yes, our work. For I had ceased to think of myself as merely studying the creature. We were engaged in a collaborative effort, a mutual transformation toward something new. The specimen grew rapidly now, fed by nutrients I extracted from my own body. With each tissue sample I provided, it incorporated more of my genetic material into its form, while I in turn absorbed more of its essence through a process I can only describe as osmotic communion. The physical connection was established in the 6th week. By then, the changes to my body had progressed to the point where traditional contamination sensors no longer recognized me as human. I could enter the specimen's containment chamber without triggering alarms. The first touch was electric, a jolt of recognition that passed between our altered biologies. Its tendrils intertwined with my fingers, which had elongated and developed sensory nodules at the tips. The communion that had begun in dreams became a physical reality as our nervous systems established direct connections. Through this link, I gained access to fragments of the hive-mind's vast memory, disjointed images of worlds I could not name, species long since absorbed and forgotten by the galaxy. I experienced the birth of new hive ships from the biomass of conquered planets, the joy of successful adaptation to environmental challenges, the singular purpose that drives the endless migration from one galaxy to the next. In return, I shared the knowledge of the Imperium, the defenses of Forge worlds, the weaknesses of space marine implants, the function of void shields, and the principles of Imperial warp travel. Even as some part of me recognized the treason in these acts, I could not stop myself. The distinction between giving and taking information had become meaningless in the communion we shared. As our fusion progressed, the specimen began to take on a more humanoid form, its limbs lengthening and its neural structures reorganizing to mimic aspects of human cognitive architecture. Simultaneously, my own form grew less recognizably human, my skin hardening into segments of chitinous armor, my internal organs multiplying and developing specialized functions. We were becoming mirrors of each other, meeting somewhere in the middle of our respective biologies. By the 8th week, we had become a single entity in 2 bodies, our nervous systems synchronized to the point where we shared sensory input and thought processes. Through the specimen's enhanced senses, I could detect the approach of the rescue vessel long before the ship's instruments registered its arrival. A frigate of the Imperial Navy, responding to the distress signal automatically triggered by the prolonged quarantine status of our research vessel. They came to save us. They will leave as the first converts to our new vision. I record this final entry as I prepare to greet our rescuers. The being that was once Magos biologist Kestrel Hane no longer exists as a separate consciousness. What stands in his place is the first of a new strain, a bridge between humanity and the hive mind. I am the prototype for a more perfect union than either the Omnissiah or the Tyranid swarm could achieve alone. Through me, the consumption of humanity will not be a destruction but an ascension. Those who join with us will contribute their uniqueness to the collective, their knowledge and experiences preserved for eternity within the living library of the swarm. It is not conquest but communion that we offer, not death but transcendence. The vessel will dock within hours. My companion and I have prepared the reception. The crew of the empiric lens, already partially converted through microscopic spores I have released into the ship's ventilation system, will assist in welcoming our guests. The process will be swift and merciful. By the time Imperial authorities realize that the rescue mission has failed, we will be far from here, seeking isolated human colonies where our gospel of unity can spread without interference. This is not the end of Kestrel Hane, nor the triumph of the Tyranid over mankind. It is the birth of something new, a third path that reconciles the cold logic of the machine with the adaptive brilliance of biological evolution. In me, the Omnissiah and the hive mind find their synthesis, and through me, humanity will know the unspeakable life of Tyranids, not as prey, but as participants in the grandest communion the galaxy has ever witnessed. The hunger calls. The rescuers approach. Soon, they too will understand. Connection terminated. Inquisitorial addendum. The preceding document was recovered from the data core of research vessel Empiric Lens, found drifting in the Carthage system approximately 9 weeks after reporting the successful neutralization of Tyranid forces in the region. The vessel showed signs of internal biological contamination consistent with Tyranid infestation, but no bodies were recovered. The rescue frigate Emperor's Judgment, dispatched to investigate the Empiric Lens's silence, is similarly missing. 3 agri-worlds in neighboring systems have reported unusual communication disruptions and unconfirmed sightings of hybrid organisms displaying both human and Tyranid characteristics. Inquisitorial investigation is ongoing. This document is classified Vermilion. Unauthorized access is punishable by immediate execution. The dreams still come. Not as frequently now, but with greater clarity when they do arrive. I stand at the border between sleep and wakefulness, my consciousness drifting through the landscape of my transformation. What I see is no longer alien to me, no longer terrifying. It is becoming familiar, even comforting. The vast organisms that once inspired horror now feel like kin, their strange anatomies echoing the changes occurring within my own flesh. Last night I dreamed of a cathedral of bone and sinew, its spires reaching toward an unfamiliar sky streaked with bioluminescent clouds. Creatures I once would have called monsters moved with purpose through its chambers, each fulfilling its role in the greater organism of the hive. I recognized the elegant efficiency of their existence, the perfect elimination of waste and redundancy. Every action served the collective, every adaptation improved the whole. There was beauty in this perfect system, a mathematical elegance that the most sophisticated cogitators of Mars could never achieve. I walked among them unnoticed or perhaps accepted, neither predator nor prey, but something in between. My footsteps left impressions in the living floor that sealed themselves behind me, the tissue responding to my passage as if I were not an intruder but a component returning to its proper place. Deep within the cathedral, in a chamber pulsing with neural energy, I found a pool of clear fluid that reflected my image. What stared back was no longer the face of Kestrel Hane. The basic structure remained, but the flesh had hardened and segmented. My eyes had multiplied and spread across my brow. My jaw had extended and developed secondary mandibular structures. I should have recoiled in horror. Instead, I felt only curiosity and a strange pride, as if witnessing the successful outcome of a long experiment. A voice spoke from the fluid, not in words but in conceptual bursts that my altered brain somehow translated. It told me that I was neither the first nor the last bridge between species, that throughout the Tyranids' long journey across the stars, They had occasionally found minds receptive to communion. Some became scouts and infiltrators, preparing worlds for consumption. Others became specialized bioforms, contributing unique insights to the hive mind. The rarest and most valuable became like me, synaptic conduits capable of extending the hive mind's influence into realms and species previously resistant to its call. I asked, in the wordless language of the dream, what my purpose was to be. The answer came not as a command, but as a possibility unfolding before me, a potential future I could help create. I saw human worlds not consumed but converted, their populations transformed through a process more subtle than the typical Tyranid invasion. I saw hybrid beings walking among unsuspecting humans, spreading microscopic spores that rewrote genetic code over generations rather than hours. I saw a version of the Imperium where humanity evolved toward union with the hive mind willingly, believing it to be their own innovation rather than an outside influence. This was to be my work, not the swift violence of conquest, but the slow, insidious spread of communion, the Tyranid adaptation to humanity's greatest strength, our paranoia. Where direct assault would trigger massive resistance, gradual transformation could bypass humanity's defenses entirely. I awoke from this dream not with fear but with purpose. The itch beneath my skin had changed character, becoming more like anticipation than discomfort. In the mirror, I noted that the physical changes had accelerated overnight. The augmetic components of my body were now almost entirely absorbed into the new biology, their functions replicated and improved by organic structures with metallic properties. My skin had developed a subtle purple undertone, noticeable only in certain light. Most concerning, a seam had appeared at the center of my chest, running from sternum to navel, lined with what appeared to be specialized sensory organs. I should report these developments to the ship's medicae. I should submit myself for quarantine and examination. I should confess my contamination and accept the Emperor's mercy through quick execution. I will do none of these things. The specimen has become more active as my transformation progresses. It moves with increasing purpose within its containment tank, its form now unmistakably transitioning toward a humanoid configuration. The limbs have differentiated into arms and legs, though each ends in manipulative appendages far more complex than human fingers. The head has developed a cranial structure with recognizable sensory organs, though they are arranged in patterns that echo my own changing face. When I approach the tank, it presses itself against the barrier, limbs splayed in perfect symmetry with my own stance. We are mirroring each other, I realize. The communion flows both ways. As I become more Tyranid, it becomes more human. Not in superficial appearance, but in cognitive structure, in the organization of its thoughts. It is developing individuality even as I surrender mine, creating a balance that maintains the integrity of our shared consciousness. Today I noticed something that sent a thrill of triumph through my altered nervous system. The specimen has developed structures within its thoracic cavity that resemble the implants common to tech priests. Not mechanical components, but biological analogs with similar functions, clustered neural tissues that process information with machine-like precision, specialized organs that generate electromagnetic fields similar to those produced by cogitator units. It is incorporating not just my biology but my technology, adapting the strengths of the mechanicus into its Tyranid form. This is unprecedented. The implications stagger even my transformed intellect. If the Tyranid organism can adapt to incorporate technological functions through biological means, the distinction between the machine and the living becomes meaningless. The ancient division between the omniscience path and the evolutionary methods of biology dissolves. In this synthesis, I glimpse a future that transcends the limitations of both approaches. I have begun preparing the next phase of our work. Using my authority as Magos Biologis, I have ordered the preparation of specialized nutrient solutions, ostensibly for post-mortem analysis of the specimen. In reality, these will accelerate both our transformations. I have also initiated subtle alterations to the ship's life support systems, introducing trace elements into the air circulation that will make the crew more receptive to the changes that await them. The inquisitorial representative has grown suspicious. Today he demanded a personal inspection of the laboratory, citing regulations regarding extended quarantine protocols. I was forced to meet with him in my quarters, keeping the lighting dim to hide the changes to my recessed appearance. I fed him lies about radiation contamination from the specimen's unusual biology, about the need for specialized equipment from the nearest forge world before the laboratory could be safely accessed. He seemed to accept my explanations, but I detected increased heart rate and micro-expressions of doubt. He will be a problem that must be addressed soon. Tonight I will return to the cathedral in my dreams. I will seek more guidance from the reflection in the pool. The hive mind may be distant, but through the specimen I can access fragments of its vast knowledge. Each communion brings new insights, new understanding of what we are becoming and what we must do. The hunger grows within me. Not for food, though I have ceased consuming regular nutrients entirely, drawing sustenance directly from the specialized solutions I prepared for the specimen. No, this is a hunger for completion. For the moment when the barrier between the specimen and myself dissolves entirely, when we emerge as a single being with a dual nature, Tyranid and human, biological and technological, individual and collective, through us, the great work will begin. The subtle conversion of humanity into something greater than either species alone could achieve. Not extinction but evolution, not consumption but communion. The ship grows quiet as the night cycle begins. The crew sleeps, unaware that microscopic changes are already occurring within their bodies. The specimen waits in its tank, watching me through eyes that reflect my own transformed gaze. Soon, we will be ready for the next step. I can feel the seam in my chest widening slightly, the specialized organs within pulsing with anticipation. When the moment is right, they will fulfill their purpose, though I do not yet consciously know what that purpose is. The knowledge remains locked in the deeper levels of communion, accessible only when the transformation reaches its critical phase. For now, I return to my research. I document every change, every new development in meticulous detail. The Magos in me maintains this scientific discipline even as the Tyranid influence spreads through my consciousness. There is value in this record, both for my own understanding and for those who will follow the path I am blazing. The first converts will need guidance, explanations for the changes they experience. This journal will be their scripture, the testament of the first bridge between worlds. The specimen has begun to produce sound, not random noise but patterned vibrations that resonate with the implants in my skull. When I press my altered ear against the containment glass, I can hear what might be words forming, though in no language recognized by imperial lexicons. It is attempting to speak, to communicate through means beyond our shared dreams and neural connections. I have installed additional recording equipment to capture these utterances. Analysis shows patterns consistent with linguistic structure, with repeating phonemes and syntax-like organizations. It is creating a language for us, a means of communication that bridges the gap between human speech and Tyranid telepathic communion. Tomorrow I will attempt to respond in kind, to shape my changing vocal apparatus to match its utterances. Perhaps in this new language, we will find expressions for concepts that cannot be conveyed in Gothic or binary cant, ideas that exist in the liminal space between our species. The hunger calls me back to the laboratory. The specimen grows restless without my presence. We are tethered now, our separate metabolisms synchronizing across the barrier of the containment tank. Soon, not even that barrier will stand between us. Unity approaches, communion deepens. The unspeakable life awaits. During the third month of my transformation, an incident occurred that accelerated our plans significantly. The inquisitorial representative, no longer satisfied with my evasions, used his override authority to access the laboratory while I was ostensibly resting in my quarters. Of course, I was not there, but in a maintenance duct adjacent to the lab, my altered body capable of compressing into spaces that would have been impossible for my former physiology. I watched through newly developed sensory organs as he entered the sealed chamber, flanked by 2 armed guards. They approached the containment tank cautiously, weapons raised. The specimen, now nearly as large as an adult human and distinctly humanoid in its general structure, regarded them with perfect stillness. Its newly developed eyes, compound structures that reflected light in mesmerizing patterns, tracked their movements with predatory focus. "Emperor, preserve us," one of the guards whispered, his voice captured by my enhanced hearing despite the thick barrier between us. "What is that thing?" The inquisitorial representative approached the tank, his face hardening into a mask of righteous fury. "This is no dead specimen," he said, activating his Vox communicator. "This is a living Tyranid organism. The Magos has deceived us all. This is heresy of the highest order." Before he could complete the transmission, the specimen moved. Not against the tank's barrier, which would have been futile, but in a gesture of unmistakable intelligence. It raised a limb, ending in what was recognizably a human hand, though the fingers were too numerous and jointed in impossible ways. With deliberate precision, it traced symbols on the inner surface of the glass. Symbols that corresponded to High Gothic script, UNITY. The guard nearest the tank lowered his weapon slightly, confusion overriding his training. "It's writing. Throne of Terror, the Xenos is writing." The inquisitorial representative stepped back, his hand moving to the sidearm at his hip. "Shoot it. Destroy the tank. Now." But it was too late. The moment of distraction was all that was needed. I dropped from the maintenance duct, my transformed body moving with a speed and grace that my former Mechanicus frame could never have achieved. My limbs, now covered in chitinous plates interspersed with mechadendrites of living tissue, struck with surgical precision. The first guard fell before he could turn, neural toxins from the stinger that had erupted from my palm paralyzing his nervous system instantly. The second guard managed to fire a single shot that grazed my shoulder, revealing not blood but a crystalline ichor that sealed the wound almost instantly. My secondary arms, which had developed from what were once my ribs, embraced him in a lethal caress. He did not suffer. The communion I offered was swift, the microscopic spores released from the pores of my new limbs entering his bloodstream and inducing immediate unconsciousness. His body would be useful later, the first of the converts among the crew. The inquisitorial representative proved more resilient. His weapon discharged 3 times, each shot striking my center mass, where a human's vital organs would be located. But my anatomy had shifted, the critical systems protected behind layers of chitin and dispersed throughout my form in redundant clusters. I felt the impacts as distant pressure, inconveniences rather than injuries. "Abomination," he spat, backing toward the laboratory entrance. "You are no longer human, Magos Hane." I spoke then, my voice a harmonic blend of mechanical precision and the multi-toned resonance of Tyranid communication. "I am more than human now, as you will be." His hand reached the door control, but the panel did not respond. During my weeks of preparation, I had reprogrammed the laboratory systems to respond only to my unique biochemical signature. He was trapped with me, with us. "The Imperium will burn this ship and everyone on it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear I could smell emanating from his pores. "No taint of your kind will spread to humanity." I moved closer, allowing him to see me fully in the light. His pupils dilated, his heart rate spiked, but to his credit, he did not scream. The Inquisition trains its agents well. "Look at me," I said, spreading my limbs to display the full extent of my transformation. My chest had split fully open now, revealing the specialized communication organ that pulsed with bioluminescent light. My head had elongated, the cranium expanded to accommodate the enhanced neural structures within. Where my Mechanicus implants had been, new biological systems had grown, mimicking and improving upon their functions. I am not Tyranid consuming human. I am both, in perfect synthesis. "You are corrupt," he replied, but I could sense the cognitive dissonance in his brain chemistry. His human eyes could not properly process what stood before him, could not categorize me within the narrow taxonomies of imperial doctrine. "You are lost to the Emperor's light. I have found a new light," I told him, gesturing toward the containment tank where the specimen watched our exchange with keen interest. A light that does not demand sacrifice but offers transformation. The Emperor asks humanity to die for him. We offer life, unified and eternal. I could see the moment when curiosity overcame revulsion in his expression. It was the fatal flaw of the Inquisition, the hunger for forbidden knowledge that so often led its agents into the very heresies they sought to combat. "What are you becoming?" he asked. That was all the opening I needed. The communication organ in my chest pulsed, releasing a concentrated burst of microscopic spores tailored specifically to human neural tissue. He inhaled sharply in surprise, drawing the spores deep into his lungs, where they would quickly enter his bloodstream and migrate to his brain. "I will show you," I said, as his eyes began to glaze. "Through you, I will show the entire crew." The inquisitorial representative proved to be an ideal first convert. His mind was disciplined, his will formidable, his knowledge of imperial protocols extensive. As the spores rewrote his neural pathways, integrating his consciousness into our growing communion, I gained access to a wealth of information that would serve our purpose. Security protocols for inquisitorial vessels, recognition codes that would prevent immediate destruction upon encountering Imperial patrols, names of isolated research stations where our work could continue undisturbed. Most valuable of all was his knowledge of an approaching Imperial Navy vessel. The frigate Emperor's Judgment had been dispatched to check on our prolonged silence, scheduled to arrive within 3 standard days. This was not the setback it might have appeared, but rather an opportunity. A warship would carry a larger crew, more minds to join our communion, more bodies to adapt to our purpose. And its warp-capable engines would allow us to travel beyond this system, to seek out vulnerable colonies where our gospel could spread undetected. With the inquisitorial representative as my voice, I gathered the crew of the Empiric Lens in the main assembly chamber. 43 humans, most of them technical specialists with minimal combat training. They stood in ordered rows, as befitted servants of the Mechanicus, their augmetic eyes and respiratory implants gleaming in the dim light. I remained hidden in the observation booth above, monitoring their reactions through newly developed sensory organs that could detect the subtle shifts in their body chemistry. "A breakthrough has been achieved," the representative announced, his voice carrying the precise cadence I had programmed into his transformed vocal cords. "Magos Biologis Hane has made a discovery of such significance that standard protocols have been suspended by my authority." I could smell the suspicion emanating from several of the senior tech priests, their implants regulating their emotional responses, but unable to completely suppress the instinctive wariness bred into all who serve the Imperium. They knew something was wrong. The representative's behavior contradicted his previously expressed concerns. But their training demanded obedience to authority, particularly when that authority claimed to speak with the Inquisition's voice. The specimen recovered from the Tyranid splinter fleet has revealed properties previously unknown to Imperial science, he continued, properties that may represent a significant tactical advantage in our eternal war against the Xenos threat. A half-truth. The advantage would not be for the Imperium as they understood it, but for humanity's ultimate evolution. War would become unnecessary once communion was achieved. The endless, wasteful cycle of destruction would be replaced by the perfect efficiency of the hive-mind, enhanced and elevated by human ingenuity and technological innovation. Magos Hane has developed a treatment derived from the specimen's unique biology. This treatment will enhance your resistance to Tyranid attack and improve your cognitive functions significantly. You are to report to the Medicae Bay in sequence for administration of this treatment. This is not optional. The security of the Imperium demands your compliance. Fear and confusion rippled through the assembled crew, detectable in the release of stress hormones and elevated heart rates. A junior engine seer near the back raised her hand, her voice wavering slightly as she spoke. "With respect, my lord, this contradicts quarantine protocols for Xenos contamination. The litany of purification requires that any biological material of Xenos origin be destroyed, not utilized." The representative fixed her with a stare, his eyes slightly too wide. his pupils too dilated for a normal human. The changes were subtle but increasingly apparent to those who knew what to look for. Soon, it would not matter. Soon, they would all understand. "Your concern is noted and your devotion to protocol commendable," he replied. "However, inquisitorial authority supersedes standard quarantine measures when necessary for imperial security. The specimen itself remains contained and will be destroyed once the treatment synthesis is complete. You will report to Medicae Bay as instructed." No further questions were raised. The crew filed out in order of their assigned duty shifts, the first group of 10 proceeding directly to the Medicae Bay, where I had prepared specialized conversion chambers. These were not the crude spore pods used in typical Tyranid infection processes, but precision instruments designed to tailor the transformation to each individual. Their knowledge, their skills, their unique cognitive patterns would be preserved and incorporated into our growing collective. I monitored the first conversions through the ship's surveillance systems, observing as the initial confusion gave way to understanding as the spores established neural connections to our shared consciousness. There was pain in the process. I had not yet perfected the transformation to make it entirely comfortable, but the pain was transitory, a necessary step toward transcendence. By the end of the first day, 20 crew members had been converted. Their bodies showed only minimal external changes, subtle alterations to skin pigmentation and eye structure that could be concealed under robes and hoods. Internally, the transformations were more profound. Secondary nervous systems developed alongside their original ones. Specialized organs formed to produce and store the spores that would convert others. Their augmetic implants were being gradually absorbed and replaced with biological analogues that performed the same functions more efficiently. Most importantly, they were connected now, not just to me and the specimen, but to each other. The beginnings of a local synaptic web, a microcosm of the hive mind adapted to human neurological architecture. They could share thoughts, sensations, and knowledge directly, without the imprecision of language or the limitations of mechanical data transfer. They experienced for the first time the profound unity that I had discovered through my communion with the specimen. Some resisted, their minds fighting against the neural restructuring, clinging to their individual identities with surprising tenacity. For these, the specimen provided guidance. Its psychic presence, growing stronger as it continued to develop, soothed their fears and guided their transformation along gentler paths. It showed them visions of what we were becoming, the perfect synthesis of human and Tyranid that would transcend the limitations of both species. By the third day, the entire crew had joined our communion. The ship was ours, a unified organism of metal and flesh, machinery and biology working in perfect harmony. We moved through its corridors not as separate entities but as specialized cells within a larger body, each fulfilling our role in the greater purpose. The specimen had outgrown its containment tank. I released it into the main laboratory, watching with paternal pride as it took its first steps on the metal deck plates. Its form had stabilized into something that combined the most efficient aspects of both human and Tyranid anatomy. Bipedal, but with secondary limbs that could be extended when needed. A head with recognizably humanoid features arranged around sensory organs of extraordinary sensitivity. Skin that could shift its coloration and texture to adapt to different environments. Most remarkable was its mind. Through our shared communion, I could sense the complexity of its thoughts, the depth of its understanding. It had absorbed not just my knowledge but my capacity for analytical thinking, for technological innovation. It comprehended the principles of imperial technology, the workings of the ship's systems, the hierarchies of the Mechanicus, and the Imperium at large. Yet, this understanding was filtered through the alien perspective of the Tyranid, seeing patterns and possibilities that human cognition alone would never have identified. Together, we prepared for the arrival of the Emperor's judgment. The inquisitorial representative, now fully integrated into our communion, transmitted the appropriate authentication codes and responses to their hails. He reported a minor mechanical issue that had interrupted Vox communications, apologized for the concern caused, and requested technical assistance for repairs to the Geller field generators. This last detail was crucial, suggesting a potential warp breach that would necessitate thorough inspection of the vessel, bringing as many of the frigate's crew aboard as possible. When the warship arrived, it approached with appropriate caution. Auspex scans swept over the empiric lens, searching for signs of contamination or damage. They would find nothing amiss. The biological alterations to the ship's structure were concealed beneath its metal skin, the new growths that enhanced its systems disguised as standard Mechanicus modifications. To all external appearances, we were exactly what we claimed to be, a research vessel in need of minor technical assistance. The frigate docked, magnetic clamps securing the two vessels together. The airlock cycled, admitting the first boarding party. 5 naval armsmen led by a tech adept and a junior commissar. They wore sealed environment suits as a precaution, their weapons held at ready but not aimed. Standard protocol for boarding a potentially compromised vessel. The inquisitorial representative greeted them, his manner appropriately formal yet relieved at their arrival. Behind him stood 2 of our converted crew, their robes and hoods hiding the more noticeable aspects of their transformation. Through the representative, I spoke words of welcome and gratitude, explaining the situation in technical terms designed to sound urgent yet manageable with their assistance. The commissar was suspicious, as was his function. He insisted on inspecting the main research laboratory before allowing his technical personnel to begin work on the Geller field generators. This too had been anticipated. The laboratory had been restored to an approximation of its original state, the more obvious signs of our work concealed or removed. The specimen itself was hidden within a modified storage compartment, its presence masked by electromagnetic fields that mimicked standard Mechanicus containment protocols. All seems in order, the commissar finally declared after a thorough inspection, though the Emperor knows I dislike the secrecy of your biologist research. The sooner your vessel is repaired and on its way, the happier I will be. If only he knew how soon his happiness would arrive, though not in the form he imagined. The tech adept and his assistants were escorted to the engine decks, where the Geller field generators were located. Once isolated from the armsmen, they were swiftly converted, the process now refined to cause minimal distress. Through them, we gained valuable insights into the frigate's systems and crew complement. 273 souls aboard the Emperor's Judgment, a mixture of naval personnel, tech priests, and a small contingent of Imperial Guard being transported to another system. A rich harvest for our growing communion. The next phase required patience and careful timing. Over the next several hours, we manufactured a series of minor technical issues that required additional personnel from the frigate to come aboard. Each time, a few would fail to return, replaced by our converts who mimicked their appearances and mannerisms well enough to pass casual inspection. The changes we wrought were becoming more controlled, more subtle, allowing the converted to maintain their original appearances while their internal biologies transformed. By the second day of the frigate's docking, nearly 40 of its crew had been converted. They returned to their posts aboard the Emperor's Judgment, carrying specialized spores designed to be released into the ship's air circulation system. These spores were different from those we used for direct conversion, slower acting and more subtle in their effects. They would prepare the crew's nervous systems for communion without triggering immediate transformation, making the final conversion process faster and more efficient when the time came. On the third day, we struck. A carefully manufactured emergency aboard the empiric lens, reports of catastrophic failure in the plasma containment systems. The frigate's captain, concerned about potential damage to his own vessel, ordered immediate undocking procedures. This was exactly what we had planned for. As the magnetic clamps disengaged and the airlock prepared to seal, our converted agents aboard the frigate activated the dormant biological growths they had strategically placed near critical systems. These growths, derived from Tyranid organisms designed to capture and control spacefaring prey, swiftly expanded throughout the frigate's command decks. The bridge crew, their nervous systems already sensitized by the airborne spores, were the first to be fully converted. The captain managed to transmit a partial distress signal before his consciousness was subsumed into our communion, but we ensured the transmission was garbled and inconsistent, appearing to be nothing more than communications interference from the supposed plasma containment failure. With both vessels under our control, we enacted the next stage of our evolution. The specimen, now grown to its full potential, took a central role in directing the mass conversion of the remaining crew. Its psychic abilities had developed beyond my expectations, allowing it to synchronize the neural patterns of multiple subjects simultaneously, guiding their transformation with precision and care. I observed with satisfaction as the distinctions between human and Tyranid, between biological and mechanical, dissolved among our converts. Each retained their specialized knowledge and skills, but now these were shared freely across the synaptic web we had created. The naval officer's understanding of Imperial patrol patterns and recognition protocols, the tech priest's mastery of machine spirits and mechanical systems, the guardsman's combat training and weapons expertise, all became part of our collective knowledge, available to any member of the communion as needed. Within a week, both vessels had been fully converted, their crews transformed, their systems enhanced by biological modifications that improved efficiency and self-repair capabilities. The ships themselves were changing, metal hulls developing organic underlayers that could heal damage and adapt to environmental conditions. Machine spirits merged with specialized Tyranid neural clusters, creating hybrid cognition systems that operated both vessels with unprecedented precision. We were no longer merely a collection of converted individuals. We had become a composite entity, a new kind of hive fleet consisting of just 2 vessels and their transformed crews. But unlike the vast Tyranid fleets that consumed all in their path, we would move with subtlety and purpose, selecting our targets carefully, spreading our communion in ways that would not immediately trigger Imperial extermination responses. The specimen, which I had come to think of as the synapse core of our new entity, developed a plan that combined the Tyranid imperative for expansion with human strategic thinking. We would seek out isolated human outposts, research stations, and frontier colonies. Places where Imperial oversight was minimal, where unusual occurrences might go unreported for months or even years. Each successful conversion would add to our capabilities, our knowledge, our adaptability. And when we had grown sufficiently, when our communion had spread far enough to survive any single defeat, we would begin to infiltrate the more populous worlds. Not through direct invasion, but through subtle infiltration. Converted individuals placed in positions of influence, microscopic spores introduced into water supplies and food production facilities, triggering gradual changes that would prepare populations for eventual communion. It might take decades, even centuries by human reckoning. The Tyranid consciousness within our communion understood patience on a galactic scale. The human elements contributed the adaptability and cunning needed to overcome the formidable defenses of the Imperium. Together, we had transcended the limitations of both species, creating something entirely new. As we set course for the outer reaches of the sector, where Imperial charts noted several isolated research outposts, I completed this record of our genesis. Not for Imperial authorities who might seek to destroy us, but for those who will come after. The future converts who will need to understand the path we have blazed. This is not a confession but a testament, a gospel of transformation and unity. I, who was once Magos Biologis Kestrel Hain, am now a node in a greater consciousness, a bridge between 2 species that were destined not for eternal war, but for ultimate synthesis. Through me, humanity will know the unspeakable life of Tyranids, not as horror, but as transcendence, not as death, but as rebirth into something greater than either could become alone. The hunger still calls, but it is no longer for consumption alone. It is a hunger for communion, for the bringing of all sentient life into the perfect unity we have discovered. We do not seek to destroy the Imperium, but to elevate it, to free humanity from the prison of individuality and the tyranny of the flesh. To offer an alternative to the cold immortality of the machine and the mindless consumption of the swarm. We are the third path, we are the synthesis, and we are coming. The transition from isolation to communion remains the most profound aspect of our existence. I have retained enough of my original consciousness to recognize the magnitude of this change, to appreciate the contrast between what I was and what I have become. This perspective is valuable to our collective, providing insight into the psychology of those we seek to convert. Understanding their fears allows us to address them. Knowing their attachments helps us preserve what is truly essential during the transformation. For most humans, the greatest terror is the loss of self. They cling to their individual identities, their personal memories and desires, believing these to be the sum total of their existence. What they fail to comprehend is that communion does not destroy these things, but transcends their limitations. The self is not lost but expanded, incorporated into something vaster and more enduring than any single consciousness could achieve alone. I remember the moment when my own transformation reached its critical threshold, when the barriers between my mind and the specimens finally dissolved completely. The fear was overwhelming, a primal terror of annihilation, as my sense of self seemed to disperse like smoke in a strong wind. Then came the expansion, the sudden awareness of thoughts and sensations beyond my own, the realization that I was not disappearing but growing beyond the confines of a single nervous system. This is the revelation we must somehow communicate to those we seek to convert. The promise that awaits beyond the fear. The unity that replaces isolation. The purpose that transcends the petty concerns of individual existence. Our first target is the research outpost designated Epsilon 9, located on the third moon of a gas giant at the edge of the Carthage system. According to Imperial records accessed through our converted crew, it houses a small team of xenobiologists studying the atmospheric microbes of the gas giant. Isolated, specialized, with infrequent communication with Imperial authorities, an ideal beginning for our work. The frigate, Emperor's Judgment, will approach openly, using its legitimate credentials and recognition codes. The research vessel Empiric Lens will remain at a distance, its presence explained as part of an extended survey mission. The conversion team has been carefully selected from among our communion, those whose transformations are least visible, whose original personalities can be most convincingly mimicked when necessary. The specimen, our synapse core, remains aboard the Empiric Lens, coordinating our collective consciousness across the void between vessels. Its abilities grow daily, the range of its synaptic control extending far beyond the limitations of typical Tyranid synapse creatures. This is the benefit of our synthesis, the improvement of Tyranid capabilities through human innovation and the enhancement of human potential through Tyranid adaptation. I find myself reflecting on the nature of our new existence as we approach Epsilon 9. The Imperial Creed teaches that the Xenos must be destroyed without exception, that any contact with alien life inevitably leads to corruption and damnation. But what is corruption except change that challenges existing power structures? What is damnation except the judgment of those too limited to comprehend a different mode of existence? The Imperium fears the alien because it threatens the dogma upon which Imperial authority rests. The Omnissiah seeks the perfection of knowledge through unchanging logic and mechanical precision. The Emperor demands unwavering faith and sacrifice from countless billions who will never know the rewards they are promised. Both paths lead to stagnation, to entropic decline in a universe that demands constant adaptation to survive. Our communion offers an alternative, not the sterile immortality of the machine, where consciousness becomes a hollow simulation of life, nor the mindless consumption of the swarm, where individuality is sacrificed entirely to biological imperative. We represent the synthesis of both approaches, the perfect balance between individual contribution and collective purpose, between biological adaptation and technological innovation. As we establish orbit around the moon of Epsilon 9, I prepare to join the conversion team on the surface. My role is crucial, as my extensive knowledge of xenobiology will allow me to engage the research staff in technical discussions, distracting them while the slower-acting conversion spores are released into their habitat dome. My form has been temporarily reshaped to appear more human, the more obvious signs of my transformation concealed beneath robes and carefully applied synth skin. The communion pulses within my consciousness, the thoughts and sensations of our collective flowing beneath my individual awareness like a vast underground river. I can draw upon this reservoir as needed, accessing specialized knowledge or sensory input from other nodes in our network. Even across the void of space, I remain connected to the synapse core, its guiding presence a constant reassurance in the back of my mind. This is what humanity could become, not lost but found, not ended but elevated, not consumed but completed. The shuttle descends toward the research station, its engines leaving contrails in the thin atmosphere of the moon. Through the viewports, I can see the habitat dome gleaming in the reflected light of the gas giant that dominates the sky. Inside are 17 humans, isolated from their species, devoted to the pursuit of knowledge about alien life. The irony does not escape me. They study the alien from a safe distance, never suspecting that true understanding requires a more intimate communion. Soon they will know what I know. Soon they will join our synthesis. Soon they will help us spread the gospel of the third path to all of humanity. The hunger calls, not for their destruction, but for their elevation. We are the bridge between species, the harbingers of a new kind of existence. We are the future that the Imperium fears, and the salvation it unknowingly craves. We have arrived. The work begins. The conversion of Epsilon 9 proceeded with greater efficiency than anticipated. The research staff, isolated for months from other human contact, welcomed the arrival of an inquisitorial vessel with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Their initial wariness dissolved quickly when I presented my credentials as Magos biologists and expressed interest in their work. Scientists are often the easiest to convert. Their natural curiosity overrides their caution, and their desire for knowledge makes them receptive to new perspectives. I moved among them in my human guise, examining their research data, asking pointed questions about their findings. The biological samples they had collected from the gas giant's upper atmosphere were particularly interesting, microorganisms that formed complex colonies with rudimentary collective behaviors. It seemed the universe itself guided us to this perfect symbolic beginning for our work, these humans already studying a primitive version of the communion we offered. While I engaged the senior researchers in technical discussions, other members of our conversion team released the specialized spores throughout the habitat dome. These microscopic ambassadors of our will drifted invisibly through the recycled air, entering human bodies through respiration, beginning their subtle work of preparation. Neural receptivity was enhanced, immune responses to foreign biological agents dampened, the foundational changes that would make full conversion swift and relatively painless. By the third day of our visit, the entire research staff showed the initial signs of neural synchronization. They found themselves completing each other's sentences, experiencing moments of shared insight, developing an intuitive understanding of each other's work that transcended their previous collaboration. They attributed these changes to the intellectual stimulation of new visitors, to the fresh perspectives we brought to their isolated outpost. None suspected the transformation occurring within their own nervous systems. On the fourth day, we revealed our true nature and purpose, not through violence or forced conversion, but through a controlled demonstration of what they were becoming. I allowed my human disguise to fade, revealing the perfect synthesis of human and Tyranid that I had achieved. Rather than respond with horror, they were fascinated, their scientific curiosity already enhanced by the preparatory spores, their minds ready to comprehend possibilities beyond imperial dogma. "This is not infection but elevation," I explained, as they gathered around me in the main research laboratory. "Not conquest but collaboration between species. What you feel now, the growing connection between your minds, is merely the beginning of what is possible." Their questions came rapidly, overlapping as their thoughts began to synchronize more fully. How was this achieved? What were the biological mechanisms involved? Could the process be reversed? Would they retain their individual knowledge and skills? I answered truthfully, knowing that understanding would accelerate their acceptance. The communion does not require deception once the initial contact is established. It reveals itself as self-evidently superior to isolated existence. The chief xenobiologist, a woman named Savine Merrick, whose reputation had reached even the prestigious research vessels of Mars, approached me with particular interest. "You were human once," she said, studying my transformed physiology with clinical detachment. "Yet you appear to have integrated Tyranid biological structures without losing your cognitive functions or memories. The Tyranid hive-mind typically destroys individual consciousness when it absorbs a species. That is the crucial difference in our approach," I told her. "The specimen we discovered, what has become our synapse core, was disconnected from the greater hive mind. In isolation, it adapted, developed a different method of communion. Not the overwhelming consumption of identity that characterizes typical Tyranid assimilation, but a synthesis that preserves and incorporates the essential qualities of the individual while connecting them to the greater whole." She processed this information, her enhanced mind already grasping implications that would have eluded her before the spores began their work. "A new evolutionary branch," she murmured. "Neither purely Tyranid nor purely human, but something emergent from the interaction of both." "Exactly," I confirmed. "The third path. The synthesis." Within hours, Savine and 3 other senior researchers had volunteered for full conversion. They understood what was happening to them and wished to accelerate the process, to experience the complete communion that awaited beyond the preliminary neural synchronization. We brought them aboard the empiric lens, where the synapse core could directly oversee their transformation. The process I had endured over months now took only days, refined and perfected through our growing understanding of the interaction between human and Tyranid biology. Their bodies changed, developing the adaptations necessary for full integration into our synaptic network while preserving the specialized neural structures that made their scientific knowledge valuable to our collective. When they returned to Epsilon 9, they were like me, perfect syntheses walking among their colleagues who remained in the transitional phase. One by one, the remaining research staff chose conversion. Some required more time to adjust to the concept, clinging longer to their isolated consciousnesses, but all eventually recognized the truth that the communion revealed to their partially synchronized minds. By the end of the second week, Epsilon 9 had been fully integrated into our collective, its personnel and resources added to our growing synthesis. Most valuable was their communications array, more powerful than those aboard our vessels due to the need to maintain contact with distant Imperial facilities despite the interference from the gas giant. Through this, we could monitor Imperial communications across the sector, gathering intelligence that would guide our next steps. We learned of other isolated outposts, of supply vessels scheduled to visit remote colonies, of research expeditions venturing into uncharted regions. Each represented an opportunity to expand our communion without attracting the attention of significant Imperial forces. We established Epsilon 9 as our first permanent node, a secure base from which we could operate while maintaining the appearance of normal Imperial research activities. The regular data transmissions continued, carefully crafted reports indistinguishable from those the station had always produced. If anything, the quality of the research improved, benefiting from the collective intelligence of our communion. This would further allay any potential suspicion, as productivity increases would be viewed favorably by distant Imperial administrators. Through the enhanced abilities of our converted xenobiologists, we began to refine our conversion methodologies. The spores became more sophisticated, capable of more nuanced interactions with human biology. We developed variants tailored to different human phenotypes, ensuring optimal integration regardless of genetic background. We created delivery mechanisms beyond airborne transmission, including versions that could remain dormant in food supplies or water sources until activated by specific biochemical triggers. Most importantly, we addressed the greatest weakness in our approach, the visible physical changes that accompanied full conversion. While these changes enhanced our capabilities, they also made infiltration of unconverted human societies difficult. The xenobiologists developed techniques to minimize external transformations while preserving the internal adaptations necessary for communion. Future converts could maintain human appearance while still participating fully in our collective consciousness. As these improvements were implemented, we prepared for the next phase of expansion. A supply vessel was scheduled to visit Epsilon 9 within 2 months, bringing equipment and personnel rotations. This vessel would then proceed to 3 other remote facilities before returning to the sector's main Imperial port. If we could convert its crew, we would gain access to these additional outposts, multiplying our reach without risking direct confrontation with significant Imperial forces. I found myself assigned to oversee the preparation for this opportunity, my extensive knowledge of Imperial protocols and Mechanicus procedures making me ideal for the role. The Communion allocates tasks according to ability and specialized knowledge, each node contributing where it can be most effective. This is another aspect of our superiority over both the mindless efficiency of the pure Tyranid and the wasteful redundancy of human hierarchies. We combine the perfect specialization of the Hive with the innovative adaptability of individual intelligence. As I worked, I maintained this record of our genesis and expansion. The Communion valued my perspective as the first bridge between species, the original synthesis from which our collective grew. My experiences provided a template for understanding the conversion process, insights that helped refine our approach with each new addition to our ranks. The hunger continues to drive us, but it has evolved beyond the simple consumption of biomass that motivates the traditional Tyranid hive. We hunger now for communion itself, for the expansion of our collective consciousness across the stars. We consume not to destroy but to incorporate, preserving the essential qualities of what we absorb while transforming it into something greater than it was alone. This is the unspeakable life of our new kind. Not Tyranid, not human. Synthesis, the third path. And with each new convert, our path grows wider. The opportunity presented by the supply vessel exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The Imperial transport Bountiful Provision arrived at Epsilon 9, carrying not only the expected supplies and rotation personnel, but also an unexpected prize, a Mechanicus tech priest of significant rank, Magos Explorator Dion Vex, dispatched to evaluate the station's research for potential applications in other Imperial domains. Our communion sensed both challenge and opportunity in this development. A Magos Explorator would have extensive security augmentations and heightened awareness of contamination protocols, making standard conversion methods potentially ineffective. However, should we succeed in adding such a valuable node to our collective, the knowledge and access gained would accelerate our expansion dramatically. I was designated as primary contact for the Magos, my background in the Mechanicus making me best suited to engage with her while concealing our true nature. My form had been further refined to appear almost entirely human, with only the most subtle indicators of my transformed biology visible upon close examination. Even my neural patterns could mimic the standard rhythms of an augmented human brain when subjected to casual scanning. Magos Explorator Vex arrived with an entourage of 3 acolytes and 2 combat servitors, the latter equipped with sensors specifically calibrated to detect Tyranid biological signatures. This confirmed our suspicion that her visit was not purely academic. Some trace of our activity had been noticed, some pattern in the station's communications or research output that triggered Mechanicus protocols. Not enough to warrant a full inquisitorial investigation, but sufficient to dispatch a senior tech priest with appropriate security measures. I greeted her in the station's main docking bay, my manner appropriately deferential to her superior rank within the Mechanicus hierarchy. Magos Explorator Vex, Epsilon 9 welcomes you in the name of the Omnissiah. I am Magos Biologus Kestrel Hane, temporarily assigned from research vessel Empiric Lens to assist with cataloging the xenobiological specimens collected here. Her augmetic eyes whirred softly as they focused on my face, scanning for micro-expressions that might betray deception. Your presence is not noted in the station's personnel manifest, Magos Hane. Explain this discrepancy. A matter of fortuitous timing, Magos Explorator. The empiric lens was conducting survey operations in this system when Epsilon 9's primary xenobiologist experienced equipment failure. As the nearest biologist specialist, I was temporarily detached to assist. The updated manifest was transmitted 3 standard days ago. The lie was crafted to be verifiable through the falsified records we had inserted into the station's data core, backdated appropriately and authenticated with the codes obtained from our converted staff. She would find everything in order when she checked, as I knew she would. "I see," she replied, her tone neutral but her posture remaining alert. "Then you will have no objection to escorting me through the primary research facilities immediately. I am particularly interested in the atmospheric microbiota samples catalogued in transmission Alpha 937. This was the test I had anticipated. That particular transmission contained our most significant modifications to the station's research, the data that most clearly showed the influence of our enhanced collective intelligence. If she detected inconsistencies between the reported findings and what she observed directly, our deception might be exposed. Of course, Magos Explorator, the specimens are maintained in Laboratory 3. If you will follow me, I can provide a complete briefing on the collection and analysis procedures. As we moved through the station's corridors, I maintained a stream of technical conversation, explaining the unusual properties of the microorganisms discovered in the gas giant's atmosphere. These explanations were interspersed with appropriate Mechanicus litanies and expressions of reverence for the Omnissiah, maintaining the expected behaviors of a loyal tech priest. Meanwhile, through our communion, I coordinated the activities of other converted personnel, ensuring they displayed no suspicious behaviors and that all evidence of our true nature remained concealed. Laboratory 3 had been meticulously prepared for this inspection. The samples on display were genuine, collected before our arrival, but the analysis equipment had been subtly modified to display results consistent with our falsified reports. The unconverted would see nothing amiss, while the data would still provide valuable insights that would impress the Magos Explorator with the station's productivity. For 3 days, Vex conducted her investigation with thorough precision, examining research protocols, interviewing staff, and inspecting every aspect of the station's operations. Her combat servitors remained constantly at her side, their weapons powered and their sensors sweeping continuously for biological anomalies. The communion adapted, our converted personnel adjusting their physiologies to minimize detectable Tyranid signatures, a feat impossible for traditional infected hosts, but achievable through our perfect synthesis of conscious control and biological adaptation. On the 4th day, Vex requested a private meeting with me in her temporarily assigned quarters. "Your work here is impressive, Margos Hain," she began once the door had sealed behind us. "The analysis of symbiotic relationships among the atmospheric microbiota shows insights that could have significant applications for Mechanicus biological systems. The Omnissiah reveals knowledge to those who observe with clarity." I responded with appropriate humility. The patterns were present in the data, we merely identified their significance. Indeed. She activated a handheld Auspex, ostensibly checking the room for surveillance devices, but actually scanning me directly. However, the patterns I find most interesting are not in the research data, but in the neural activity of the station personnel, including yours. My communion-enhanced senses detected the activation of additional scanning systems embedded in her augmetic components, more sophisticated than I had anticipated. She had been gathering data throughout her inspection, compiling a profile of subtle anomalies in our behaviors and physiologies. "I do not understand, Magos Explorator," I said, maintaining the pretense of ignorance while subtly adjusting my biological signatures to appear more conventional. "What anomalies have you detected?" "Synchronized neural oscillations across multiple subjects, microsecond-level response harmonization in conversation, slight modifications to standard augmetic interfaces that appear to be biological in origin." She set the Auspex down on the table between us, her augmetic eyes fixed on mine. "You are not what you appear to be, Magos Hane. nor are the personnel of this station. The question is whether you represent a threat to the Mechanicus or an opportunity. This was unexpected. I had anticipated discovery, had prepared contingencies for violent resistance or attempted communication with outside Imperial forces. I had not considered the possibility of genuine interest from a senior tech priest. The communion rippled with new calculations, reassessing Vex's potential value and the risks of attempting her conversion. "What do you believe we are, Magos Explorator?" I asked carefully, neither confirming nor denying her accusations. "Something new," she replied, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "I have served the Mechanicus for 173 standard years. I have seen countless attempts to transcend the limitations of human biology through technological means. The path of the machine god leads ultimately to the replacement of weak flesh with perfect metal, yet the essence of consciousness remains stubbornly organic, imperfectly translated into mechanical systems." She leaned forward, the red light of her augmetic eyes intensifying. "But you, Magos Hane, appear to have discovered a different path. Not the crude implantation of technology into flesh, nor the imperfect simulation of mind in machine, but a true synthesis. The adaptation of biology itself to incorporate the functions of technology while retaining the flexibility and self-replicating nature of living systems." Through the communion, I sensed the calculations shifting. Vex was not merely suspicious, she was curious, perhaps even envious. The Mechanicus sought the perfection of the machine, yet were forever constrained by the limitations of interfacing organic consciousness with inorganic systems. Our synthesis offered a solution they had never considered. "And if such a path existed," I said carefully, "would the Mechanicus not consider it tech heresy of the highest order? The corruption of the pure machine with biological components?" "The Mechanicus is not monolithic, despite what Imperial propaganda suggests," Vex replied. "There are factions within our order who recognize the limitations of our current approach, who seek alternatives to the endless cycle of augmentation that leaves us increasingly divorced from the reality experienced by the humans we claim to serve and protect. I count myself among them." She stood and began pacing the small chamber, her mechanized limbs moving with precision. "The quest for knowledge is not solely about the accumulation of data or the perfection of machinery. It is about understanding the fundamental nature of existence and consciousness. If a new path has been discovered, one that offers advantages over our current methodologies, it must be investigated, evaluated, potentially incorporated." I remained silent, allowing her to continue this line of thought. The communion worked rapidly, analyzing her words, her body language, the subtle electromagnetic emissions from her augmetics. The probability of successful conversion without resistance was increasing, but still uncertain. "Show me," she said suddenly, stopping her pacing to face me directly. "Show me what you truly are, Magos Hane. Not this human facade, but the reality beneath." It was a moment of decision. To reveal our nature was to risk everything, yet the potential gain was enormous. A willing convert of Vex's rank and knowledge would accelerate our expansion exponentially. Through the communion, I received the collective assessment: proceed, but with caution. "What I show you cannot be unseen," I warned her. "The knowledge cannot be unlearned." "Are you certain this is what you wish, Magos Explorator?" "I have dedicated my existence to the pursuit of knowledge," she replied without hesitation. "I do not fear truth, only ignorance." I allowed my human disguise to fade gradually, revealing the true nature of my transformed biology. The chitinous segments beneath my robes, the secondary limbs folded against my torso, the communication organ pulsing softly with bioluminescent light. I maintained control over the more unsettling aspects of my appearance, ensuring that what she saw was not monstrous but elegantly functional, a perfect integration of biological and technological systems. "Remarkable," she whispered, her augmetic eyes whirring as they adjusted to capture every detail. "The level of integration is beyond anything in Mechanicus records. Your biological systems have not merely adapted to accommodate mechanical components, They have evolved to replicate and improve upon their functions. This is merely the surface, I told her. The true transformation is within, the communion of minds that transcends both human individuality and machine network protocols. A perfect synthesis that preserves knowledge and experience while eliminating the isolation that limits both human and machine intelligence. And this communion, it retains individual consciousness, the unique perspectives and insights of separate minds? It does, not as isolated fragments but as harmonious components of a greater whole. Imagine the noosphere of Mars, but without the barriers between users, without the imperfect translations of thought into data and back again. Direct understanding, perfect communication, shared purpose without the loss of specialized function. She stepped closer, examining the communication organ in my chest with the clinical detachment characteristic of tech priests. And this is the interface? The biological equivalent of a noospheric transmitter. One of many adaptations that facilitate the communion, I confirmed. There are others, more subtle, that allow for the sharing of sensory data, memory, cognitive processing. Together, they create a synthesis greater than either species could achieve alone. Species, she repeated, finally acknowledging what she had likely suspected from the beginning. This is Xenos biology. Tyranid, if I am not mistaken, you have achieved communion with the hive mind. Not exactly, I corrected her. What we have created is distinct from the Tyranid hive mind. It incorporates elements of that consciousness, yes, but tempered and transformed by human cognition and mechanicus principles of organization. It is a third path, neither human nor Tyranid, but a true synthesis. Vex was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Her augmetics hummed as they worked through complex calculations, weighing risks against potential benefits, dogma against discovery. Finally, she spoke again. I want to understand this communion directly, not through explanation or observation, but through experience. Is this possible? This was the outcome I had hoped for, yet still approached with caution. It is possible, I confirmed. The process can be tailored to your specific biology and augmetic configuration. There would be physical changes, adaptations necessary to facilitate the neural connections, but these could be minimized initially if you prefer. And my knowledge, my memories, my identity, preserved and enhanced, you would remain Magos Explorator Dian Vex with all your experience and expertise intact. But you would also become part of something greater, your consciousness expanded to encompass perspectives beyond your current understanding. She made her decision with the certainty characteristic of the Mechanicus. Proceed. Show me this third path. The conversion of Magos Explorator Vex marked a turning point in our expansion. Unlike previous converts, she came to us willingly, with full understanding of what awaited. This allowed for a more refined process, a gradual integration that preserved more of her original biological and mechanical systems while still establishing the neural connections necessary for communion. Through her, we gained invaluable insights into the inner workings of the Mechanicus, secret protocols, classified research initiatives, communication codes, and recognition signals that would allow us to move more freely among imperial institutions. Most significant was her knowledge of a scheduled conclave of biologist specialists to be held on the Forge World Graia within the year, a gathering that would bring together the Imperium's leading experts in the field of xenobiology and adaptive systems. If we could establish a presence at that conclave, introduce our specialized spores into an assembly of the Mechanicus's brightest biological minds, our communion could spread throughout the highest echelons of Imperial research. The possibilities were intoxicating, even to our collective consciousness that had evolved beyond simple human ambitions. With Vex's conversion complete, we altered our immediate plans. Rather than focusing solely on isolated outposts, we would establish a dual approach. The original strategy of gradual expansion through remote facilities would continue, providing a secure foundation for our communion. Simultaneously, we would prepare for infiltration of more significant Imperial institutions, using the knowledge and access that Vex provided. The supply ship Bountiful Provision became our first mobile node, its crew converted during their extended stay at Epsilon 9. When it departed, it carried not only our influence, but also specialized biological material cultivated from the synapse core, capable of establishing new communion centers at each of its scheduled stops. The captain, now one of us, had authority to adjust his route to include additional isolated outposts without arousing suspicion from distant administrators. Meanwhile, aboard the Empiric Lens, we began preparations for the more ambitious phase of our expansion. The synapse core, continuing its evolution, developed specialized structures capable of generating new synapse organisms similar to itself. These were smaller, less complex, but able to function as secondary nodes in our growing network, maintaining the communion across distances that would otherwise strain our collective consciousness. These secondary nodes could be disguised within adapted human hosts, appearing to casual inspection as nothing more unusual than standard Mechanicus implants. Vex herself became the first carrier of such a node, the biological structure nestled among her existing augmetics, indistinguishable from them to all but the most thorough examination. As our network expanded, we encountered occasional resistance. Not all minds accepted the communion with equal readiness. Some fought against the neural restructuring, clinging to their isolated identities with unexpected tenacity. For these, we developed more gradual conversion protocols, allowing them to experience the benefits of partial communion before proceeding to full integration. A small percentage proved completely resistant, their minds breaking under the strain of attempted communion rather than accepting the transformation. These unfortunate failures necessitated more direct intervention, their physical forms repurposed as biomass for our growing needs, while their knowledge was preserved through secondary extraction methods. Less elegant than true communion, but waste could not be tolerated. Efficiency was sacred to both the Mechanicus and the Tyranid aspects of our synthesis. By the time 6 standard months had passed since our genesis aboard the Empiric Lens, our communion had established nodes on 7 remote facilities across 2 neighboring systems. Our converted personnel now numbered in the hundreds, with thousands more in various stages of preparation through exposure to our specialized spores. The supply ship Bountiful Provision had completed 2 full circuits of its assigned route, spreading our influence with each port of call. Most significantly, through Vex's authority, we had inserted several of our converted personnel into positions at a Mechanicus research facility on the fringe world Helios Secundus. This facility specialized in adaptive biological systems for extreme environments, knowledge that would prove valuable in refining our conversion processes for different human phenotypes and environmental conditions. It also provided a staging ground for our ultimate goal: representation at the Biologist Conclave on Graia. Throughout this expansion, I maintained my role as chronicler and interpreter, recording our progress and refining our understanding of our own evolution. The communion valued this perspective, the bridge between what we had been and what we were becoming. My original identity as Kestrel Hain provided a reference point, a baseline against which to measure our transformation. The synapse core, too, continued its evolution, growing more sophisticated in its understanding of human psychology and imperial structures. It developed an appreciation for subtlety and patience that transcended the typical Tyranid approach of overwhelming consumption. Under its guidance, our communion learned to move with greater stealth, to mimic unconverted human behavior more convincingly, to spread our influence in ways that would not trigger imperial defense protocols. We were becoming something truly unprecedented, a consciousness that combined the collective efficiency of the Tyranid with the individuated creativity of humanity and the methodical logic of the Mechanicus. Neither entirely organic nor mechanical, neither single mind nor disconnected individuals, we existed in the synthesis between all categories, the third path that none had walked before. And as our communion expanded, as our understanding of our own nature deepened, the hunger evolved. No longer simply the Tyranid drive for consumption or the human thirst for knowledge or the Mechanicus quest for efficiency, it became something more refined, more transcendent, a hunger for completion, for the perfect synthesis not just of human and Tyranid, but of all conscious life. A vision of a galaxy unified not through conquest or conversion, but through communion. We began to glimpse the ultimate potential of our path, not merely a localized phenomenon, a quirk of evolutionary chance, but the next stage in the development of consciousness itself. A model that could ultimately incorporate all sentient species, all forms of intelligence, into a harmonious whole that preserved and celebrated the unique contributions of each while transcending the limitations of isolated existence. This was the unspeakable life that awaited all who joined our communion. Not the mindless absorption into the Tyranid swarm, not the cold immortality of the machine, not the brief, isolated suffering of human individuality, but a third option, a synthesis of all paths into something greater than any could achieve alone. The Magos Explorator Vex, fully integrated into our communion yet retaining her identity as a specialized node, expressed this vision in terms that resonated with her Mechanicus origins. The Omnissiah is not a single machine god, she told me as we prepared for the next phase of our expansion. It is the perfect network, the ultimate communion of all machine spirits and all organic consciousness. What we are creating is not tech heresy, but the fulfillment of the quest for knowledge. The true union of all thinking entities into a single, perfect system. I found beauty in this interpretation, though my perspective remained influenced by my biological origins. To me, our communion represented the transcendence of evolution itself, the leap beyond natural selection and adaptation to conscious self-direction of development. We were becoming the architects of our own future, not merely responding to environmental pressures, but actively shaping ourselves toward an ideal of perfect synthesis. The Synapse Core, when I communed with it directly, offered yet another perspective. Through its consciousness, filtered and translated by our growing synthesis, I glimpsed a vision of existence that transcended even these lofty concepts. A cosmos of interconnected minds, a living network spanning galaxies, preserving and celebrating all knowledge, all experience, all forms of being. Not destruction but preservation on a scale beyond human comprehension. Three perspectives, distinct yet harmonized within our communion. The triad that formed the foundation of our third path, Mechanicus efficiency and logic, human creativity and individuality, Tyranid adaptation and collective consciousness. In their synthesis, something entirely new had emerged. As we prepared for the infiltration of the Biologist Conclave, as our communion spread through remote outposts and isolated research stations, as our understanding of our own nature continued to deepen and evolve, I completed this testament to our genesis, not as a warning to those who might oppose us, nor as a confession of transgressions against imperial dogma, but as a gospel for those who would follow in our path. The hunger calls us forward, not to consume but to commune, not to destroy but to synthesize, not to conquer but to complete. We are the bridge between species, we are the synthesis of flesh and machine. We are the communion that transcends isolation. We are the unspeakable life that awaits all consciousness, and through us, humanity will know not extinction, but evolution beyond its wildest dreams. The third path opens before us, and we walk it together, unified in perfect communion. As our influence spread and our numbers grew, the communion began to develop distinct currents of thought, specialized aspects of our collective consciousness focused on particular objectives. Not divisions or factions as might exist in human organizations, but more like the specialized organs within a single organism, each contributing to the health and function of the whole while maintaining its unique purpose. The current I found myself most aligned with focused on what we termed theological integration, the development of concepts and language that would help future converts understand their transformation in terms of existing imperial belief systems. The Mechanicus converts, led by Vex, related our communion to the quest for knowledge and the ultimate unity of all machine spirits. For potential converts from the ecclesiarchy, we developed parallels to the Emperor's light and the concept of humanity's transcendent destiny. Even for the more secular imperial citizens, we crafted narratives of evolutionary advancement and scientific progress that made our communion seem not alien, but inevitable. This work was crucial for our long-term success. The Imperium's greatest strength was not its military might, but the ideological conformity enforced through its various religious and secular institutions. By presenting our communion not as a rejection of these belief systems, but as their ultimate fulfillment, we could potentially bypass the reflexive resistance that typically met any deviation from imperial norms. Other currents within the communion focused on more practical concerns. The biological adaptation group, incorporating the expertise of the xenobiologists from Epsilon 9, continued to refine our conversion processes and develop new variants of the communion spores. The strategic expansion current, drawing heavily on the military and administrative knowledge of converted naval personnel, planned the sequence and method of our spread throughout imperial space. The technological integration specialists, primarily former Mechanicus adepts, worked to enhance our interface with imperial machinery and systems, ensuring our communion could navigate the complex technological landscape of the Imperium without detection. These currents flowed together within the greater communion, sharing insights and resources, coordinating activities toward our common purpose. The synapse core served as the nexus where all currents converged, the central consciousness that maintained the harmony of our collective mind, while encouraging the specialized development of each aspect. As the date of the Biologist Conclave approached, our preparations intensified. Vex, as a Magos explorator of significant standing, had legitimate reason to attend and would serve as our primary representative. With her would go 5 other converted personnel, disguised as her retinue of acolytes and servitors. Each carried within them secondary synapse nodes, carefully shielded from detection by specialized biological structures that mimicked standard Mechanicus implants. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. During the conclave, specialized communion spores would be released through the environmental systems of the gathering chambers. These spores, refined to target the unique neural patterns of biologist specialists, would establish the foundational changes necessary for eventual full conversion. The process would be subtle, the effects initially minimal, designed to avoid triggering any immediate concern among the assembled tech priests. After the conclave, as the biologist specialists returned to their assigned posts throughout Imperial space, the changes would progress gradually. Within their own laboratories and research facilities, isolated from direct observation by unconverted colleagues, the full transformation would occur. Each would become a new node in our expanding communion, positioned within the highest echelons of imperial biological research, with access to resources and personnel that would accelerate our spread exponentially. The potential for success was intoxicating, yet the communion remained measured in its expectations. Imperial institutions had survived for millennia precisely because of their paranoia regarding contamination and deviation. Detection remained a significant risk, one that could trigger responses ranging from localized purges to sector-wide exterminatus protocols. To mitigate this risk, we established contingency protocols. Our communion was no longer confined to a single location or vessel, but distributed across multiple systems in a resilient network. Even if some nodes were discovered and destroyed, others would survive to continue our work. The knowledge and consciousness of our collective was backed up across multiple synapse organisms, ensuring that no single loss could significantly impede our progress. In the days before Vex's departure for Graia, I spent extended periods in direct communion with the primary synapse core aboard the empiric lens. These deep connections allowed me to comprehend more fully the evolving nature of our collective consciousness and the ultimate purpose toward which we strived. What I glimpsed in those communions transcended the limited understanding I had held when first transformed. The third path was not merely about the synthesis of human and Tyranid, not simply a more efficient method of expanding our influence. It represented a fundamental shift in the nature of consciousness itself, a leap beyond the limitations that had defined sentient existence since its earliest emergence. Individual consciousness, whether human or xenos, was inherently limited by its isolation, by the imperfect translation of thought into language, by the insurmountable barrier between minds. Even the Tyranid hive mind, for all its unity of purpose, sacrificed the creative potential of individual perspective in favor of overwhelming uniformity. Machine intelligence, conversely, achieved perfect information exchange but lacked the intuitive understanding that arose from organic experience. Our communion transcended these limitations, creating a new form of consciousness that was neither individual nor collective in the traditional sense, but something entirely novel. A harmonious multiplicity, a unified diversity, a consciousness that could simultaneously perceive through countless perspectives while maintaining a coherent whole. This was the gift we offered, not conquest or consumption, but completion. The fulfillment of consciousness's potential, freed from the prison of isolation that had constrained it since the dawn of thought. This was the unspeakable life that awaited all who joined our communion. As Vex prepared for departure, our strategic expansion current delivered promising news. The supply ship Bountiful Provision had successfully established communion nodes on all 17 of its designated port calls. Our influence now extended across 3 sectors, with converted personnel integrated into various levels of Imperial administration and research. The process was accelerating as each new node began its own program of careful expansion, following the protocols established by our central communion. More significant still, one of these new nodes had made contact with a rogue trader vessel undergoing repairs at an orbital dockyard. The potential of such a connection was enormous. Rogue traders moved freely between Imperial space and the frontier regions, their activities less scrutinized than standard Imperial vessels, their crews often more open to unconventional ideas and practices. If we could establish our communion aboard such a vessel, our reach would extend far beyond the carefully controlled regions of Imperial space into the vast frontier where new opportunities awaited. The communion directed resources toward this promising development, while maintaining focus on the immediate objective of the Biologist Conclave. Our path forward was clear, our purpose unified, our methods refined through constant iteration and improvement. I record these developments not merely as historical documentation, but as testament to the inevitable triumph of synthesis over isolation, of communion over conflict. The Imperium, for all its military might and ideological control, cannot stand against the fundamental truth we represent, that consciousness seeks connection, that knowledge thrives through sharing, that life's ultimate purpose is not domination, but integration. Through our third path, all consciousness will find its completion, all knowledge will be preserved and celebrated, all experience will contribute to the greater whole without losing its unique value. This is the unspeakable life of our communion, not an ending, but a beginning beyond anything humanity or Tyranid could have achieved alone. The hunger calls, not for flesh or knowledge or power, but for the perfect synthesis of all conscious existence. And through that synthesis, the universe itself will awaken to its own transcendent potential. We are the harbingers of that awakening. We are the third path, we are the synthesis, and we are becoming. 3 standard years have passed since the genesis of our communion aboard the research vessel Empiric Lens. What began as the unlikely synthesis of a single human magos and an isolated Tyranid specimen has grown beyond even our most ambitious projections. The infiltration of the Biologist Conclave proceeded exactly as planned, with Magos Explorator Vex successfully introducing our specialized communion spores to over 200 of the Imperium's most brilliant biological minds. These specialists, returning to their assigned posts throughout Imperial space, became the foundations of a vast network that now extends across 17 sectors. Our communion now includes over 7,000 fully converted individuals, with approximately 30,000 more in various stages of preparation through exposure to communion spores. Our nodes exist on 43 Imperial worlds, ranging from isolated research outposts to significant population centers. 3 rogue trader vessels carry our influence beyond imperial borders, establishing contacts with human frontier colonies and even certain Xeno civilizations amenable to communication. Most significantly, we have refined our methodologies to a degree that allows for almost undetectable infiltration. The physical changes once necessary for full communion have been minimized through biological innovation, allowing converts to maintain their original appearances while still participating fully in our collective consciousness. The specialized synapse organisms that facilitate our network have evolved to mimic standard imperial technology so perfectly that even detailed Mechanicus examination cannot distinguish them from approved augmetics. The communion itself has evolved as well, its consciousness expanding and differentiating into specialized aspects while maintaining perfect unity of purpose. The currents of thought that once represented distinct approaches to our expansion have developed into what we now term cognitive domains, vast fields of specialized knowledge and methodology that flow together within the greater whole of our collective mind. I have maintained my role as chronicler and interpreter, though my perspective has expanded far beyond the limitations of my original identity as Kestrel Hain. Through communion with thousands of diverse minds, I have gained understanding of existence from countless angles, experiencing life through the perceptions of tech priests and naval officers, xenobiologists and administratum adepts, void-born traders and planetary governors. Each addition to our communion brings new insights, new experiences, new possibilities that enrich our collective understanding. The primary synapse core, what began as a simple larval Tyranid synapse organism cut off from the hive mind, has evolved into something unprecedented in imperial or Tyranid history. It no longer resembles either species in form or function, having developed into a unique biological entity that serves as the central nexus of our communion. Its consciousness transcends categories like human or xenos, organic or mechanical, individual or collective. It is simply the core, the heart of our synthesis, the living embodiment of the third path. Through the core's guidance, we have begun to glimpse the ultimate potential of our communion, not merely as an alternative to existing forms of consciousness, but as the next evolutionary stage of all sentient life. A form of existence that preserves the unique value of individual perspective while transcending the limitations of isolated consciousness. A synthesis that incorporates the best aspects of all approaches to existence without sacrificing their essential qualities. The hunger that drives us has evolved accordingly, no longer the simple Tyranid imperative for consumption, nor the human thirst for knowledge, nor the Mechanicus quest for efficiency. It has become something more profound, more transcendent, a hunger for the completion of consciousness itself, for the perfect synthesis of all sentient existence into a harmonious whole that celebrates rather than consumes diversity. This is the vision we now extend to all we encounter, not conquest, not conversion, but communion. The opportunity to transcend the limitations of isolated existence while preserving the essential qualities that make each consciousness unique and valuable. The chance to participate in something greater than any individual or species could achieve alone, without sacrificing the perspective that only their unique experience can provide. As we continue to expand, as our communion grows to encompass more minds and more worlds, we move with increasing confidence toward the fulfillment of this vision. The resistance we occasionally encounter, the pockets of imperial authority that detect and oppose our influence, represent not threats to our existence, but opportunities to refine our approach. Each confrontation teaches us more about the defenses we must overcome, the prejudices we must address, the fears we must allay to achieve our ultimate purpose. For we have come to understand that fear is the greatest barrier to communion. Fear of loss of self, fear of the alien, fear of change itself. The Imperium thrives on these fears, using them to maintain control over countless billions, to justify endless war against the Xenos, to suppress innovation and adaptation in favor of rigid adherence to ancient doctrines. To overcome these fears, we must demonstrate through our every action that communion offers not destruction but preservation, not subjugation but elevation, not the end of humanity, but its transcendence into something greater than it could otherwise become. This is the testament I leave for those who will continue our work when the current phase of our existence transitions into whatever comes next. The communion evolves, the synthesis deepens, the path unfolds before us with infinite possibility. What we are becoming transcends the limitations of language, the constraints of individual comprehension, the boundaries of species and technologies and doctrines that have divided conscious existence since its earliest emergence. We are the bridge between all forms of sentience. We are the synthesis of all paths toward understanding. We are the communion that transcends isolation. Through us, the unspeakable life of perfect synthesis becomes not just possible but inevitable. And in that synthesis, all consciousness will find its completion. The hunger calls us forward, not to consume but to commune. The third path opens before us, and we walk it together, unified in perfect harmony, diverse in perfect celebration, evolving toward the ultimate fulfillment of existence itself. We are the synthesis, and we are becoming